The Historical Jesus and Mythical Christ, a lecture by Gerald Massey. Apparently there's no copyright notification in the comments below, it's indicated. We found this in the public domain, public access, so there shouldn't be any copyright problem or claim or strike given us. And we brought this particular book because it was of interest. We bring it for educational purposes alone. Information on Gerald Massey, because he's considered by his peers in his times like a pseudo-historian, etc. Gerald Massey, born 29th May 1828, died 29th October 1907, was an English poet and writer on spiritualism and ancient Egypt. Spiritualism is a social religious movement popular in the 19th and early 20th centuries, according to which an individual's awareness persists after death and may be contacted by the living, the afterlife, or the spirit world. And ancient Egypt. Early life. He was born in or near Tring, Hertfordshire in England, to poor parents. When little more than a child, he was made to work hard in a silk factory, which he afterwards deserted for the equally laborious occupation of straw plaiting. That's a method of manufacturing textiles by braiding straw, and the industry that surrounds the craft of producing these straw manufacturers. Straw is plaited to produce products including straw hats and ornaments, and the process is taken in a number of locations. These early years were rendered gloomy by much distress and deprivation, against which the young man strove with increasing spirit and virility, educating himself in his spare time and gradually cultivating his innate taste for literary work. He was attracted by the movement known as Christian socialism, into which he threw himself with wholehearted vigour. And Christian socialism is a religious and political philosophy that blends Christianity and socialism, endorsing socialist economics on the basis of the Bible and the teachings of Jesus Christ. Many Christian socialists believe capitalism to be idolatrous and rooted in the sin of greed. So, into which he threw himself with wholehearted vigour, and so became associated with Frederick Denison Morris, who was an English Anglican theologian, a prolific author and one of the founders of Christian socialism. Since the Second World War, interest in Morris expanded. And also Charles Kingsley, who was a broad church priest of the Church of England, a university professor, social reformer, historian, novelist and poet. He is particularly associated with Christian socialism, the Working Men's College, and forming labour cooperatives in his time, in his day. Later life. From about 1870 onwards, Massey became increasingly interested in Egyptology and the similarities that exist between ancient Egyptian mythology, the collection of myths from ancient Egypt which describe the actions of the Egyptian gods as a means of understanding the world around them. The beliefs that these myths express are an important part of ancient Egyptian religion, and the gospel stories, or the biblical ones related, meaning the Christian message, but in the 2nd century it came to be used also for the books in which the message was reported. In this sense, a gospel can be defined as a loose-knit episode narrative of the words and deeds of Jesus, culminating in his trial and death, and so forth. He studied the extensive Egyptian records housed in the Assyrian and Egyptology section of the British Museum in London, where he worked. It looks like a old CPU you inserted into a machine, right? It's old computers. Yeah, it looks kind of like that. Okay, so he worked in a section of the British Museum in London, closely with the curator, Dr. Samuel Birch, Egyptologist and antiquarian, and other leading Egyptologists of his day, even learning hieroglyphics. At the time, the Temple of Horus at Edfu was first being excavated. He had a writing career. His first public appearance as a writer was in connection with a journal called The Spirit of Freedom. In 1889, Massey published a 2-volume collection of his poems called My Lyrical Life. He also published works dealing with spiritualism, the study of Shakespeare's sonnets, 1872 and 1890, and theological speculation. It is generally understood that he was the original of George Eliot's Felix Hot. Marianne Evans, known by her pen name George Eliot, was an English novelist, poet, journalist, translator, and one of the leading writers of the Victorian era. She wrote several novels: Adam Beck, 1859, The Miller on the Floss, 1860, Silas Mana, 1861, Romola, 1862, etc. Felix Holt the Radical, 1866, is a social novel written by English author George Eliot about political disputes in a small English town at the time of the First Reform Act of 1832. In Massey's poetry, Massey was a believer in spiritual evolution, also called higher evolution, the idea that the mind or spirit, an analogy to biological evolution, collectively evolves from a simple form dominated by nature to a higher form dominated by the spiritual or divine. It is differentiated from the lower or biological. He opined that Darwin's theory of evolution was incomplete without spiritualism. The theory contains only one half, the explanation of man's origin, and needs spiritualism to carry it through and complete it. For while this ascent on the physical side has been progressing through myriads of ages, the divine descent has also been going on. Man being spiritually an incarnation from the divine as well as the human development from the animal creation. The cause of the development is spiritual. Mr. Darwin's theory does not in the least militate against ours. We think it necessitates it. He simply does not deal with our side of the subject. He cannot go lower than the dust of the earth for the matter of life. And for us, the main interest of our origin must lie in the spiritual domain, as according to Gerald Massey, in regards to Charles Darwin's evolution theory. In regard to ancient Egypt, Massey first published the Book of the Beginnings, followed by the Natural Genesis. His most important work is Ancient Egypt, the Light of the World, published shortly before his death. Yeah, we did a video on the Book of the Beginnings, Volume 2, because in it compares the New Zealand Indigenous people's language, Maori, with the Egyptian, and he talks about that and also the Pacific Islands. And apparently he visited New Zealand in the late 1800s, 1900. And here is a newspaper to verify that, and they talk about his passing. It's quite an old article in the Auckland Star, volume 38, issue 260, 31 October 1907, page 5. So he visited there, and he probably got some information from there. Like Godfrey Higgins, a half-century earlier, Massey believed that Western religions had Egyptian roots. Massey wrote, okay, this guy was a magistrate, landowner, etc. The human mind has long suffered an eclipse and had been darkened and dwarfed in the shadow of the ideas, the real meanings of which had been lost into moderns. Myths and allegories whose significance was once unfolded in the mysteries have been adopted in ignorance and reissued as real truths, directly and divinely vouchsafed to humanity for the first and only time. The early religions had their myths interpreted. We have ours misinterpreted. and a great deal of what has been imposed on us as God's own truth and soul revelation to us is a mass of inverted myths. One of the more important aspects of Massey's writings were his assertions that there were parallels between Jesus and Egyptian god Horus, primarily contained in the book The Natural Genesis, first published in 1883. Massey, for example, argued in the book his belief that both Horus and Jesus were born of virgins on 25th December, raised men from the dead. Massey speculates that the biblical Lazarus, raised from the dead by Jesus, has a parallel in El Asa-Us, a title of Osiris, died by crucifixion and were resurrected 3 days later. These assertions have influenced various later writers such as Alvin Boyd, Kuhn, Tom Harper, Yosef ben Yochanan, it's Dr. Ben there, the people like Shaka Amos on Sunday the TV Live venerate, because he's a very knowledgeable man, and as far as ancient Egypt went, and Dorothy M. Murdoch. And here it says, Christian ignorance notwithstanding, the Gnostic Jesus is the Egyptian Horus, who was continued by the various sects of Gnostics under both the names of Horus and of Jesus. In the Gnostic iconography of the Roman catacombs, child Horus reappears as a mummy babe who wears a solar disc. The royal Horus is represented in the cloak of royalty, and the phallic emblem found there witnesses to Jesus being Horus of the resurrection. Criticism. Christian theologian W. Ward Gusk, a PhD from Harvard and Manchester University, sent emails to 20 Egyptologists that he considered leaders of the field, including Kenneth Kitchen of the University of Liverpool and Ron Leprechaun of the University of Toronto. In Canada, the United States, Britain, Australia, Germany and Austria to verify academic support for some of these assertions. His primary targets were Tom Harper, Alvin Boyd and the Christ myth theory, and only indirectly Massey, or Gerald Massey. 10 out of 20 responded, but most were not named. According to Gask, Massey's work, which draws comparisons between the Judeo-Christian religion and the Egyptian religion, is not considered significant in the field of modern Egyptology, and is not mentioned in the Oxford Encyclopedia of Ancient Egypt or similar reference works of modern Egyptology. Gask reports that those who responded were unanimous in dismissing the proposed etymologies for Jesus and Christ, and one unspecified Egyptologist referred to Alvin Boyd Kuhn's comparisons as fringe nonsense. However, Harper's response to Gask quotes leading contemporary Egyptologist Eric Hornung that there are parallels between Christianity and ancient Egypt, as do the writings of biblical expert Thomas L. Thompson. Theologian Stanley E. Porter has pointed out that Massey's analogies included a number of errors. For example, Massey stated that 25th September as the date of birth of Jesus was selected based on the birth of Horus, but the New Testament does not include any reference to the date or season of the birth of Jesus. Yeah, that's what we're thinking. He was wrong there. The earliest known source recognizing 25th December as the date of birth of Jesus is by Hippolytus of Rome. He was a bishop of Rome and one of the most important 2nd, 3rd century Christian theologians, whose provenance, identity and corpus remain elusive to scholars and historians. Suggested communities include Rome, Palestine, Egypt and Anatolia. Okay, so the date of birth of Jesus is by Hippolytus of Rome, written around the beginning of the 3rd century based on the assumption that the conception of Jesus, the Immaculate Conception, the Annunciation, took place at the spring equinox. Hippolytus placed the equinox on 25th of March and then added 9 months to get December 25, or 25th December, thus establishing the date for festivals. The Roman chronography of 354, or calendar 354, is a compilation of chronological and calendrical texts produced in 354 AD for a wealthy Roman Christian named Valentinus by the calligrapher and illustrator Furius Dionysius Philocalus. The Roman chronography of 354 then included an early reference to the celebration of a nativity feast in December as of the 4th century. Porter states that Massey's serious historical errors often render his works nonsensical. For example, Massey states that the biblical references to Herod the Great were based on the myth of Herod, the evil Hydra serpent. That'd be something like Medusa, right? But probably having several heads. While the existence of Herod the Great can be well established without reliance on Christian sources. Okay, there's some references. Further reading. Okay, so I'm going to go back and have a look at this particular book. The Historical Jesus and Mythical Christ, a lecture by Gerald Massey. The Historical Jesus and Mythical Christ. All necessary references to the original authorities may be found in the author's natural genesis. In presenting his readers with some of the data which show that much of the Christian history was pre-extant as Egyptian mythology, so what he's trying to say there is one basically parallel the other, or is like the other. They had similar claims or ideas. Gerald Massey asks you to bear in mind, or would have asked you to bear in mind, that the facts, like other foundations, have been buried out of sight for thousands of years in a hieroglyphical language that was never really read by Greek or Roman and could not be read until the lost clue was discovered by Champollion, is the French man, almost the other day. In this way, the original sources of our mytholatry and Christology remained as hidden as those of the Nile until the century in which we live. So he's saying about 1800s, early 1900s. The mystical matter enshrouded in this language was sacredly entrusted to the keeping of the buried dead, who have faithfully preserved it as their book of life, which was placed beneath their pillows or clasped to their chests, in their coffins and their tombs. Secondly, although Gerald Massey was able to read the hieroglyphics, nothing offered to you is based on his translation. He worked too warily for that. The transcription and literal rendering of the hieroglyphic text within this book were employed were by scholars of indisputable authority. There is no loophole of escape that way. He lectured upon the subject of Jesus many years prior to this book. At that time, he did not know how they had been misled, or that the Christian scheme, as it is aptly called in the New Testament, is a fraud, founded on a fable in the Old. He then accepted the canonical Gospels as containing a veritable human history, and assumed, as others do, that the history proved itself. Finding that Jesus, or Jehoshua ben Pandera, was an historical character known to the Talmud, he made the common mistake of supposing that this proved the personal existence of the Jesus found portrayed in the canonical Gospels. But after you have heard his story and weighed the evidence, for the first time collected by him and presented to the public at this time of this book being written, you will not wonder that he should have changed his views or that he should be impelled to tell the truth to others as it appeared to him. Although he was only able to summarise within this book, in the briefest manner possible, a few of the facts that he has dealt with exhaustively elsewhere. The personal existence of Jesus as Jehoshua ben Pandera can be established beyond a doubt. One account affirms that, according to a genuine Jewish tradition, that this man, or that man, who is not to be named, was a disciple of Jehoshua ben Perachia. It also says he was born in the 4th year of the reign of the Jewish king Alexander Jananias, notwithstanding the assertion of his followers that he was born in the reign of Herod. That would be more than a century earlier than the date of birth assigned to the Jesus of the Gospels. But it can be further shown that Jehoshua ben Pandera may have been born considerably earlier, even than the year 102 BC. Although the point is not of much consequence here, Joshua, son of Perachia, was a president of the Sanhedrin, the 5th, reckoning from the Ezra as the first, one of those who in the line of descent received and transmitted the oral law, as it was said, direct from Sinai. There could not be two of that name. This Ben Perachia had begun to teach as rabbi in the year 154 BC. We may therefore reckon that he was not born later than 180 to 170 BC, and that it could hardly be later than 100 BC, when he went down into Egypt with his people, for it is related that he fled there in consequence of a persecution of the rabbis, feasibly conjectured to refer to the civil war in which the Pharisees revolted against King Alexander Jananias, and consequently about 105 BC. If we put the age of his pupil, Jehoshua ben Pandera, at 15 years, that will give us an approximate date extracted without pressure, which shows that Joshua ben Pandera may have been born about the year 120 BC. But 20 years are a matter of little moment here. According to the Babylonian Gemara to the Mishnah of Tract Shabbath, this Jehoshua, the son of Pandera and Stada, was stoned to death as a wizard in the city of Lud, or Lydda, and afterwards crucified by being hanged on a tree on the eve of the Passover. This is the manner of death assigned to Jesus in the book of Acts. The Gemara says there exists a tradition that on the rest day before the Sabbath, they crucified Joshua on the rest day of the Passah, the day before the Passover. The year of his death, however, is not given in that account, but there are reasons for thinking it could not have been much earlier nor later than BC 70, because the Jewish king Jananias reigned from the year 106 to 79 BC. He was succeeded in the government by his widow Salome, whom the Greeks called Alexandra, and who reigned for some 9 years. Now the traditions, especially of the first Toledoth Jehoshua, relate that the queen of Jananias and the mother of Hyrcanus, who must therefore be Salome, in spite of her being called by another name, showed favour to Jehoshua and his teaching, that she was a witness of his wonderful works and powers of healing, and tried to save him from the hands of his sacerdotal enemies, because he was related to her, but that during her reign, which ended in the year 71 BC, he was put to death. The Jewish writers and rabbis with whom Gerald Massey talked always denied the identity of the Talmudic Jehoshua and the Jesus of the Gospels. This, observes Rabbi Jekiels, which has been related of Jehoshua ben Perachia, as people contains no reference whatever to him, whom the Christians honour as God. Another rabbi, Salman Zevi, produced 10 reasons for concluding that the Jehoshua of the Talmud was not he who was afterwards called Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth, and of the canonical Gospels, was unknown to Justus, to the Jew of Celsus, and to Josephus, that the supposed reference to him by the latter being an undoubted forgery. The blasphemous writings of the Jews about Jesus, as Justin Martyr calls them, always refers to Joshua ben Pandera, and not to the Jesus of the Gospels. It is Ben Pandera they mean when they say they have another and a truer account of the birth and life, the wonder working and death of Jehoshua or Jesus. This repudiation is perfectly honest and soundly based. That's according to Gerald Massey. The only Jesus known to the Jews was Jehoshua ben Pandera, who had learnt the arts of magic in Egypt, and he was put to death by them as a sorcerer. This was likewise the only Jesus known to Celsus, the writer of the True Logos, a work which the Christians managed to get rid of bodily, with so many other of the anti-Christian evidences. Okay, so prior to that, 1st century AD, you had the disciples of that Jesus the Christ, Yeshua Mashiach, the Messiah, okay, hanging around with him in his 3-year mission for 24/7, 365. Okay, and they wrote down what they heard him say, what he taught them, and what they saw him do, healing wise, miracle wise, etc. And then when the church of Jerusalem was destroyed, or the congregation where they congregated, they fled with these texts, and Thomas, the founder of the original ancient, very old apostolic church of the East, he gave them these texts. He gave the appointed priests, because he was the founder of it, around the 1st century AD. He gave it to them, these texts, and they hid them from Emperor Constantine, who wanted to destroy them, because he had the mother church, and he wanted everybody to be subject unto that particular church, the Roman state church. So they hid them, therefore preserving them for 2,000 years, as testified by the once head patriarchate in 1957, Ma Isai Shimon.